Here's a few things to bear in mind if you really want to tell great stories about your work. Have you ever noticed how 3 is the magic number in stories? 3 bears, 3 wise men, 3 wishes. Well, when it comes to telling stories, there are 3 basics you've got to include. And they are, first, stuff happens. This means real people doing real things in a real time and place. Second, people care. If there's no emotion, you're not really telling a story and no one is really listening. Third, there's a moral to the story. This is what you want people to learn, to think or do differently as a result of hearing your story. Stories are often about rules, about how we humans live together. Break the rule and you trigger a story. So anything to do with fairness or cheating will get people talking. So too, loyalty and betrayal of trust, and situations where someone is caring for or harming another. Finally, we react at a gut level to anything to do with purity or filth. Now, you can use stories to change the culture of your workplace. Start out by thinking, what action do I want people to take? Or what thing do I want them to stop doing? Then ask, what stories can you tell that will illustrate this point you're trying to make? And finally, ask, where do you need to go to find these stories? And then where will you tell them? Of course, finding stories isn't always simple because people don't always want to share them. There is a knack to getting people to tell you their story. Maybe you can ask a stupid question. Make them the expert who explains things to you. Instead of asking for their story, ask instead about people like you. This gives someone the chance to talk about themselves while sort of hiding behind others. Another trick is to ask them to imagine the opposite. Rather than saying, "Why do you like this job?" ask, "What would you feel if you couldn't do this anymore?" And then, of course, listen carefully to what people say and be ready to dig a little deeper to get to the emotion behind the story. What about refuting negative or inaccurate stories? Well, if you're dealing with bad stories, you can't just give people facts. They won't listen. You should first acknowledge the bad story, even if it's inaccurate. Then tell a better story about real people, real emotion, with real lessons. Only then have you earned the right to talk facts. This way, you stand a chance of getting people to listen. There's really 2 types of story you can tell. There's stuff that's happened in the past, and you can drop those stories into conversation by saying, so for example, these stories must be accurate. Or you can tell future stories about stuff that hasn't happened yet, and you drop those into the conversation by saying something like, just imagine. Of course, these stories can't be accurate because they haven't happened, but they must be plausible. Finally, if you want to avoid telling boring stories about your work, stop thinking like a boss. Think instead like a customer, like a beginner who's just joined your organisation, or like an outsider looking in. Think what would amaze and surprise them about your world. There are more storytelling tips on my website, newthinking.tools.